Rain hammered the pavement as a slender white cane tapped against the polished granite steps of the Carrington Hotel. Inside, Manhattan's most feared crime family held court. When she stumbled straight into the Don's chest, the entire room froze. Then he leaned down and whispered a single word that shattered everything. Fifth Avenue was a chaos of honking cabs, muttered curses, and the relentless hiss of a sudden torrential downpour. Elena Voss tightened her grip on the strap of her Mafia carbon fiber cello case, letting its familiar weight steady her against the surging crowd. To be blind in New York was to navigate the world entirely through sound and touch. To do it in the middle of a flash flood was close to suicidal. Her slim white cane swept in tight, practiced arcs, but the rising water was already swallowing the tactile cues in the pavement. Her shoes were soaked through. Panic rose in her throat. She needed shelter, and she needed it now. Through the roar of the storm, she caught the muffled thunk of heavy revolving doors and the faint, elegant strain of a string quartet working through a Vivaldi movement. A hotel lobby. She followed the warmth pouring from the entrance and the faint scent of lilies and floor polish. Elena pushed through the brass doors of the Carrington. The sudden hush of the grand foyer wrapped around her, a jarring contrast to the storm behind her. She paused, shaking rain from her dark hair, chest still heaving as she tried to orient herself in the cavernous space. She had no idea she had just walked into the middle of a war. Less than 50 feet away, Damien Castellano was coming down the marble staircase. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who didn't just own the building, he owned the fate of everyone inside it. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit like a second skin, Damien ran the Castellano organization, the most feared syndicate on the East Coast. A platinum watch flashed beneath his cuff, quiet proof of inherited fortune. He was surrounded by 6 armed men, led by his second-in-command, Raphael. They had just walked out of a brutal meeting in a private suite upstairs. A splinter faction of the Belandi family had tried to bleed funds from Castellano accounts hidden in the Caymans. Damien had handled the traitor himself, leaving him broken and bleeding across the rug of the penthouse suite. His pulse was still elevated, his sharp eyes sweeping the lobby out of pure habit, cataloging every possible threat. He was a man who trusted no one and forgave nothing. "Bring the convoy around front," Damien told Raphael, his voice a low, controlled growl that expected instant compliance. "And burn the Belandi warehouses in Red Hook before sunrise. No survivors." "Consider it handled, boss," Raphael answered, already reaching for his earpiece. Damien took another step toward the exit, his mind already moving on to the mechanics of an all-out war. Then it happened. Elena, thrown off by the sudden change in acoustics and still shaking from the storm, hurried forward searching for a front desk. Her wet heel slid across a slick marble tile. She lost her footing, the cello case dragging her sideways, and pitched forward with her hands out to catch herself. Instead, she collided with a wall of solid muscle. The impact drove the breath from her lungs. Her cane clattered against the marble, the sound ringing out like a gunshot through the enormous room. In an instant, the atmosphere in the Carrington flipped from quiet luxury to something lethal. The unmistakable sound of 6 pistols being drawn and racked cut through the silence. Raphael and the guards snapped into a defensive half-circle around their boss, weapons trained on the drenched woman who had somehow closed the distance to Damien Castellano. "Back away," Raphael snapped, finger tight against the trigger. Elena froze, heart slamming against her ribs. She couldn't see the guns, but she could smell gun oil and the sharp bite of cologne. She could hear tailored fabric shifting, the synchronized breath of men prepared to kill. Terror locked every muscle in her body. She was pinned against a man who felt carved from stone. Damien had reacted purely on instinct. The moment she collided with him, his combat reflexes fired. His hands closed on her shoulders to shove her back. Then he looked down. Everything stopped. He saw dark hair plastered to pale skin. He saw wide, unseeing hazel eyes fixed blankly somewhere near his collarbone. And then his gaze caught the thin crescent scar just under her jaw, a scar he had personally paid 3 surgeons to minimize 10 years ago. His breath caught. The man who, seconds earlier, had ordered a warehouse burned to the ground with the same tone he'd used to order coffee, looked as though the floor had opened beneath him. His grip on her shoulders shifted, from a soldier's instinct to something closer to holding on for dear life. "Boss," Raphael's voice cracked with confusion. "Say the word." Damien didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the guests frozen behind the lobby pillars. His entire focus had narrowed to the trembling woman in his arms. The woman he had watched from a distance for 10 years. The woman he had sworn, once, to protect no matter the cost. He bent his head, his mouth close to her ear, and said the word that sent a shockwave through the room. Mine. It wasn't possession. It was a vow wrapped in 10 years of guilt, and an obsession that made no sense even to him. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena trembled, her senses working overtime to process everything at once. The man holding her smelled like cedar, rain, and, underneath it, the unmistakable copper tang of blood. "Lower the weapons," Damien ordered. His voice didn't rise, but it carried a weight that allowed no argument. "Damien, we don't know who," Raphael started. "I said lower them." Damien's glare cut him off, sharp enough to make a hardened killer take a step back. One by one, the guns disappeared. Elena finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I couldn't see. I slipped. Please, just let me find my cane." She tried to pull free, but his hand stayed gentle and immovable on her arms. "You're not going back out there," Damien said, his tone completely different now. Nothing like the man who'd stood there seconds before. He bent down, retrieved her cane, and pressed it carefully into her shaking hand. "Raphael, get her cello. Careful. It's a late 18th century instrument. Scratch it, and you lose a hand." Elena's breath caught. How could a total stranger know the age and make of her cello at a glance? Before she could ask, Damien settled his heavy, dry overcoat around her soaked shoulders. "Walk with me, Elena." Hearing her own name from this stranger sent ice down her spine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" she demanded, planting her heels against the marble. But his momentum simply carried her forward anyway, flanked by armed men. Toward the revolving doors. "Someone who owes you a debt," Damien answered, cryptic, as they stepped out into the storm. A black armored sedan idled at the curb, rear door already open, a driver waiting silently in the rain. "I'm not getting in a car with you," Elena shouted, panic finally breaking through the shock. She swung her cane in defense. Damien caught it out of the air without effort. "Elena, listen to me." His voice dropped, urgent now. "Vincent Belandi's men are breaking into your apartment on West 81st right now. If you go home tonight, you die. Get in the car." The certainty in his voice, combined with the mention of an attack on her home, broke her resistance completely. Numb, she let him guide her into the heated leather interior of the sedan. Raphael loaded the cello into the trunk before climbing into the front seat. The armored doors sealed shut, muting the storm entirely, and the car merged into traffic. The ride was unbearably quiet. Elena sat rigid against the door, cane held like a weapon, while Damien sat across from her, watching her without pause. He poured a glass of aged scotch from the car's crystal decanter and pressed it gently into her hand. "Drink. It'll stop the shaking," he said quietly. She took a small, burning sip. The warmth helped ground her. "Why does someone want me dead?" she asked, voice cracking. "I'm a cellist. I play weddings and symphonies. I don't have enemies." "You don't," Damien said, pouring his own glass. "Your father did." Elena's head turned sharply toward his voice. "My father, Edward Voss, was a corporate accountant. He died in a car accident 10 years ago." Damien let out a slow, humorless breath. "Your father was a brilliant man, Elena, but he wasn't an accountant. He managed the finances for the Castellano organization. My family." Her breath caught. "You're lying. My father was quiet, boring. He worked in a cubicle. He worked in a vault 3 floors beneath the Diamond District," Damien corrected, his voice heavy but without malice. "He laundered hundreds of millions for my father. He was the best we ever had. 10 years ago, the Belandi family found out who he was. They wanted the ledgers." He leaned forward, his scent surrounding her. "That accident on the interstate, it wasn't a drunk driver, Elena. It was a Belandi enforcer named Victor. Your father turned the wheel to take the impact himself so you'd survive in the passenger seat. The glass took your sight. His choice saved your life." Tears stung Elena's sightless eyes as buried memory surfaced. The screech of tires, shattering glass, her father's final breath, his hand holding hers in the wreckage. "Why tell me this now?" she sobbed, glass trembling in her grip. "Why ruin what I remember of him?" "Because Vincent Belandi just learned Edward Voss's daughter is alive," Damien said, restrained fury coloring his voice. "He thinks your father hid an encrypted ledger with you. His men were sent to your apartment tonight to force it out of you. The sedan glided into an underground garage, heavy steel gates sealing shut behind them. For 10 years I've watched from a distance, Damien admitted. And for the first time his voice carried something unguarded, a vulnerability at odds with his usual command. Pieces of Elena's life clicked together with sudden, terrifying clarity. The scholarship to Juilliard, she whispered, funneled through a shell company in Geneva, Damien confirmed. The experimental surgeries at Johns Hopkins, paid in cash. He reached across and closed his hand gently over hers, not forcing it, letting her pull away if she wanted. She didn't move. When my father died, I took over the organization, Damien said, thumb tracing slowly over her knuckles. I swore on his grave the debt we owed Edward Voss would be paid. I promised to keep you safe. You were never supposed to know I existed, Elena. You were supposed to have an ordinary, beautiful life far from all of this. The door opened, cold air rushing into the car. But tonight, the darkness found you anyway, Damien said, stepping out and offering his hand. Welcome to 2020 Central Park South. You're standing in the most secure building in Manhattan. You'll stay here until every last Belandi is gone. Elena took his hand and stepped out of the car. She had walked into the Carrington seeking shelter from a summer storm. Instead, she had walked straight into a gilded cage, held by a man who had secretly shaped her entire life. The penthouse at 220 Central Park South was a fortress suspended a quarter-mile above the noise of the city. For 3 days, Elena existed inside a world of suffocating luxury. Her bare feet learned the geography of heated rugs and cool imported marble. The air stayed perfectly climate-controlled, carrying a faint scent of white tea and fig. Despite the comfort, it was still a prison with a view. Damien treated her with an intensity that bordered on reverence. He barely slept. She could hear his measured pacing across the hardwood late into the night. He arranged elaborate meals from a private chef, filled her closet with silk loungewear, and spent hours sitting silently in the corner of the living room, listening to her play. Beneath the surface, though, a war was boiling over. The Belandi family, cornered and desperate, was tearing the city apart looking for her. Sirens echoed endlessly from the streets below, the sound of chaos Damien was orchestrating to crush his enemies. On the fourth night, everything shattered. Raphael burst through the doors, breathing hard, his urgency cutting straight through the sonata Elena had been playing. Boss. Vincent made a move on the Teterboro Strip. They hit a weapons shipment. It's a bloodbath. Our men are pinned in Hangar 3. Damien cursed, the sound of a glass slamming down echoing through the room. Vincent's getting desperate. He knows we're closing in. I need to be there to coordinate the extraction. It's risky, Damien, Raphael warned. Could be a distraction. I don't have a choice. Lose that shipment, and the commission reads it as weakness. Damien crossed the room, the metallic click of a loaded magazine sliding into his pistol. He stopped just inches from Elena. I have to go for a few hours, he said, voice softening instantly. The building's on full lockdown. Biometric elevators. Nothing gets in or out. Will you be safe? She asked, letting her voice tremble just enough, playing exactly the frightened role he believed in. I'm always safe, Tesoro, he murmured, brushing her cheek with his knuckles. Daniel's staying to watch you. He's my top captain. You have nothing to worry about. With a rush of cold air and the heavy thud of reinforced doors, Damien and Raphael were gone. The penthouse fell into a thick, eerie silence. Elena sat still, hands resting on the cello strings, mapping the room by ear. The hum of the refrigerator, wind against the reinforced glass, and the deliberate, heavy breathing of the man left behind to watch her. Daniel. He stood near the entryway, smelling of cheap cigarettes, peppermint gum, and the sharp, nervous sweat of adrenaline. So, Daniel finally said. Gone was the respect he usually showed around Damien, replaced by something sharp and cruel. The famous Elena Voss, the blind heiress, sitting on a fortune. Elena didn't move. Damien brought me here to protect me, she said flatly. Daniel let out a low laugh. She heard the distinct, chilling sound of a suppressor being screwed onto a barrel. Damien's a fool, Daniel sneered, footsteps crossing the rug toward her. His obsession with you has made him blind to the business. You don't burn down half the city over a girl. Vincent Belandi offered me $2 million and a piece of Queens to open the door from the inside. Teterboro was bait, just to get the boss out of the building. Elena's breathing shallowed. You're betraying him. I'm securing my future, Daniel corrected, close now, heat radiating off him. Vincent doesn't want you dead. Not yet. He wants the ledger your father hid, the account numbers, the routing codes for the Swiss and Cayman shells. Edward Voss was paranoid. He wouldn't have destroyed it. He left it with you. I don't know what you're talking about, Elena whimpered, shrinking against her cello. Cut the act. Daniel grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. She cried out, "You're going to tell me exactly how to access those accounts, or I start breaking those precious fingers of yours one at a time." Daniel made a fatal assumption. He mistook her blindness for helplessness. He assumed the trembling woman in front of him was exactly what she appeared to be. What he didn't know was that Edward Voss, a man hunted by the most dangerous people on the East Coast, had spent his final years preparing his daughter for the moment the past caught up with her. "Please," Elena sobbed, letting the bow slip from her fingers. Her hand drifting across the floor toward the cane resting near the chair. "I'll tell you anything." "That's a good girl," Daniel said, loosening his grip, his guard dropping with his arrogance. "Where is it?" Her fingers closed around the grip of her cane. "The ledger isn't a book," Elena said quietly, and the tremor was gone from her voice entirely. The tears vanished. Daniel frowned, leaning closer. "What did you say?" "I said," her voice went cold, "it's not a book." "You amateur." She moved before he could react. Not a flinch, an explosion. Using her grip on his forearm as leverage, she twisted her whole body, driving the heel of her palm into the nerve cluster beneath his jaw with bone-jarring force. Daniel choked, his vision flashing white, his hold on her hair releasing completely. Before he could raise the pistol, Elena's other hand snapped her cane through the air. Her thumb found a hidden switch on the grip. With a sharp, metallic click, a thin blade extended from the tip. She slashed upward, precise and merciless, severing the tendons in his wrist. Daniel screamed, the pistol falling uselessly to the marble. He stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm, utterly unable to process what had just happened. You, he stammered. Elena didn't hesitate. Her sense of the room, honed over a decade of sound and pressure, was flawless. She swept his legs out with a sharp kick to the knee. Daniel crashed onto his back, gasping. Elena stepped over him and pressed the tip of her blade against his throat. "My father didn't hide the ledger, Daniel," she said, her tone as cold as any dawn's. "He encoded it. It's buried in the sheet music of an original concerto he wrote for me. I memorized every account number, every routing code, every shell company by the time I was 15. I've been carrying the financial backbone of the Castellano and Belandi empires in my head this whole time." Daniel stared up at her blank, unseeing eyes, real terror finally setting in. She wasn't a victim. She was a weapon her father had built and left waiting. "I've known Damien was watching me for 10 years, Elena continued, pressing just enough to draw blood. "I let his men shadow me. I let myself be brought here, because I knew Vincent Belandi would eventually come to finish what he started, and I needed Damien's resources to erase the Belandis for good." The doors burst open with the force of a small explosion. Damien stormed in, jacket gone, shirt stained with blood, pistol raised. Raphael and 3 guards flooded in behind him, having realized Teterboro was a diversion and racing back across the city. Damien froze. The breath left his lungs entirely. The scene made no sense. His fragile, terrified Elena stood over his top captain, a bloody blade pressed to the traitor's throat, her posture radiating a lethal calm that commanded the entire room. "Elena," Damien breathed, lowering his weapon an inch. Struggling to reconcile the woman standing in his living room, she didn't turn her head. "He sold you out to Vincent, Damien. 2 million and a slice of Queens. He came for the ledger." Raphael looked from the bleeding, sobbing Daniel to the blind Cella standing over him, jaw slack. "Boss." She took him apart completely. Damien's shock slowly gave way to something far more dangerous, a slow, dark smile. The obsession he'd carried for the girl he thought needed protecting shifted instantly into something closer to awe. "Raphael," Damien ordered, voice thick with pride. "Take Daniel to the room downstairs. He lives until he tells us where Vincent's sleeping tonight. Then he doesn't." "Yes, boss." Raphael hauled the weeping traitor off the floor and dragged him out. The doors clicked shut, leaving Damien and Elena alone in the wreckage of the room. Damien holstered his weapon and crossed to her slowly. Elena pressed the switch on her cane. The blade slid back into the shaft. He stopped inches away, the smell of gunpowder and rain still clinging to him. He reached out, framing her face gently with blood-stained hands. "You played me," Damien murmured, thumb tracing the scar on her jaw. There was no anger in it, only fascination. "For 10 years I thought I was protecting a helpless girl in the dark. I was never helpless." "Damien," Elena said, leaning into his touch, a dangerous smile breaking across her face. "You just liked the story better that way. My father was the sharpest mind in your organization. Did you really think he'd leave me with nothing?" Damien leaned down, his mouth brushing hers in a fierce, quiet promise. "Vincent Belandi dies tonight. Every warehouse, every safe house, every soldier he has left burns before sunrise." "I know," Elena whispered, hands sliding up to grip his ruined shirt. "And when the ashes settle, Damien, we rebuild this together, unseen." Damien kissed her, sealing a partnership forged in blood and secrets. New York didn't know it yet, but the balance of power in its underworld had just shifted for good. The untouchable Don had finally met someone who matched him, and the most dangerous person in the city was the one no one ever saw coming.